past tomorrow be better than the one who was the one I've been? Can I enter in the womb again? Can I ask you for a second chance? Perhaps a few more after that. Can I let the past be in the past? Can I ask you for a second chance?
If you are able, please stand for our scripture reading today, which comes from Matthew 26. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, "This fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied, "but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I do not know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath. "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately, a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated. Not a whole lot of amens to that, but that's all right. Great to be with you all today. I'm glad to be back with you. If you didn't know, the last couple of weeks, my wife and I have been in Manila in the Philippines for our Every Nation World Conference. It was amazing being there with more than, 12,000 people across 80 nations of the world. That was a remarkable moment. And not only did I come back with my heart full of faith for what God's doing in the nations and in our church, but as you can kind of tell, I came back with a little cold and cough in my backpack. So I'm not quite sure how that made its way in. Tried to screen it out, but here we are. Just say, "Help him, Lord." Help him, Lord. All right, very good. Oh, man. I mean it. We are near the end of looking at Jesus' journey to the cross. And his journey, we read, culminates in his own trial. But not only in his own trial, because the genius of this narrative given to us by the gospel writer Matthew is this. It shows us not only that Jesus' life is on trial, but that Peter's own soul is on trial. And actually, if we'll let him press us, we might find today that our own souls and lives are on trial as well. Not just one trial, but 2 maybe even 3. Because the beauty of the person of Peter we're going to see today is that, in the words of Matthean scholar Grant Osborne, Peter is every man. He is every man. He is everyone. Peter is all of us. He's a stand-in in the narrative for all of us. So this Palm Sunday, let's pause and look not only at Jesus' journey, not only at Peter's journey, but maybe even, if we're vulnerable enough, to look at our own journey with respect to Jesus as well. Where are you today? Let's try to see. What does Jesus' trial show us about Peter and maybe even us? Jesus' trial shows us, number 1, Peter's courage. It shows us Peter's cowardice. And finally, it shows us Peter's cure, his courage, his cowardice, and his cure. Let's go number 1 and look at Peter's courage here in the passage. And you're like, man, courage, where's that? Like, man, isn't he like the guy who denied Jesus? Well, yes, but if you're asking that, I realize why. Because, it's easy to villainize Peter without affirming, though we should, without affirming first his real courage displayed in 2 places here. First, he's got a kind of courage in front of the disciples, because the night he was betrayed, Jesus takes his disciples in the upper room. He serves them the Last Supper. Then he casually drops the truth bomb on them that they're all going to fall away any minute now. And while they all sit there stunned, Peter pipes up and he's like, nah. He's like, even if all of them fall away, look at them side-eyed jokers, losers right there, Jesus. Jokers to the left of me, clowns to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you, Jesus. Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. What a guy. Now, you can call it what you like, but he doesn't just take what Jesus says lying down. He's like, I got you, Lord. It's me and you together forever, ride or die, And I think, though, it takes at least some kind of courage to do this, to speak up when no one else will. Then after dinner, Peter displays a second kind of courage, because Jesus is now arrested by a makeshift mob that come for him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's taken off to be put on trial for blasphemy, for claiming to be God, in front of Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest. Where are the other disciples at the trial? They are nowhere to be found. They have all disappeared except for, guess who? One guy. Peter's there. He actually dares to follow Jesus where no one else will. We're told Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. Look at this. He entered and sat down with who? The guards, guys with swords, guys with weapons to see the outcome. So Peter here is clearly braver than the other disciples who are long gone, and he's clearly better than his buddy Judas, who got his bag, got paid for betraying Jesus. Peter is really doing well so far, wouldn't you say? I would. And yet he falls so far. Why? Because his courage was a false courage. A false courage. What looks like courage is actually massive self-confidence. Why? Because he's looking at himself. He's sizing up who he is, thinking about how great he is, how faithful he is, how much of a cop-out loser kind of group he's been hanging with the other disciples. And that's the way the world tells us to overcome fear, by the way. It tells us to look at our own selves, have massive self-confidence. Now, for example, a number of years ago when I played college baseball at the University of Houston, it's a fine institution, I might add, by the way. I did get eliminated this week in the big basketball tournament. Thank you for all your very apologetic texts I received. I'm very loved as a pastor. Anyway, I want to get that out of the way. I became so afraid of making a mistake playing as an athlete that I literally was so gripped by fear, I could not throw the ball from second base to first base. Now, other than the pitcher throwing it to first base, that is the easiest and simplest throw any person on a field can make, but I couldn't do it. I spiked it 60 feet away at the guy's feet, threw it over his head into the dugout. Error after error. Psychologists call it the yips. I would throw, again, balls in the stands. I met with a counselor, but it didn't help because what I was told was to visualize success over and over. Imagine how good it would feel to make a good throw. Think about how great you are, Morgan, which I did, and it didn't take long, actually. It's a joke, see, right? First service just stared at me. You guys get it, right? You're more awake. Didn't take long to think about that. All right. But here's the thing. The problem isn't feeling fear in life, is it not? It's succumbing to fear. It's not feeling fear, it's giving into fear, because feeling fear is not the problem. Being completely oblivious to all forms of fear is actually unhealthy and unhelpful. A number of years ago, two of my very precious sons, now a little bit older, decided they want to conduct a little science experiment in our home. Sort of a contest. It was also an experiment. It involved human flesh and a hot stove. You think you know where this is going, but you don't. What happened? Well, I found out later through multiple interrogations, because the guilty parties were less than forthcoming with their confessions and their truth-telling, that these two boys of mine had in fact challenged each other to a contest to see which boy could hold his hand on the hot stove the longest. Then it escalated quickly, and one of the boys decided to up the ante by placing his forehead on the hot stove. And let's just say that the second boy didn't even take his turn after the first boy had gone, because the first one came away howling with a credit card size burn on his forehead. And the second boy decided that, in fact, smart kid, that the winner is actually the loser in this contest, and the loser is actually the winner. Now, what if the first boy had said to the second, "There's nothing to be afraid of. Hey, just visualize there being no pain. You'll be fine. Think about how assertive and powerful your forehead is, Just put your face on the stove." That's stupid, because our problem isn't feeling fear. Our problem is giving in to fear. Like Madeline Engel wrote Wrinkle in Time. She said, "Only a fool is never afraid." And I think she's right, because overconfidence, false courage, is just as deadly as a lack of courage. Because like Peter, overconfidence causes you to miscalculate in life. I could never go wrong. It could never be me. That'll never happen to me. I mean, I'll put it like this. If the sin of the Israelites entering the promised land was underconfidence, thinking less of themselves, the sin of every Peter is overconfidence, thinking more of themselves. And furthermore, we should point out, and more importantly, banishing fear through looking at how great you are, especially compared to others, like Peter does earlier, that doesn't help you when there's no prospect for a good outcome. Like if there's no prospect for this, if it's going to cost you your job or your reputation to do the right thing, I mean, gosh, what's the point of doing that? I mean, what's the point of carrying through with that? So let's ask, are we better than Peter? Are we better than Peter? Peter, let's point out again, has followed Jesus further than the other disciples. He has more accountability, saw more miracles than you and I will ever see. He's around Jesus and still falls apart. Yeah. Why? For the same reason we can be around Jesus and still fall apart, give in to fear. It's because Peter looked at himself and said, not, "You've got me, God." He said, "I've got me." I, he said, can do all things through Peter, who gives Peter strength. See, why did Peter's courage fail? It's because he placed it in the wrong source, and his soul shriveled like a raisin in the sun. But this wasn't just a desertion. It was worse. It was a denial, because number two, Peter's false courage deteriorates into Peter's cowardice. Let's look at it. How did this all come crashing down? How did he go from "I will never fall away" to what we read earlier? Well, now, sitting feet away from each other. You've got to picture this. Jesus and Peter are each accused 3 times. 3 different charges for each individual. So let's see each trial, what happens, and the difference between master and student. Trial number 1. Jesus is first accused wrongly by 2 false witnesses. Jesus remains silent. Peter is first accused by a servant girl of knowing Jesus, but he denies it. Now before, Peter is full of bravado in front of all his bros. Real easy to be brave in an upper room, isn't it? With no one else around you. But here he shrinks before, literally in the Greek, in front of one little servant girl. Trial number 2. Jesus is challenged by the high priest to give truthful testimony. He does, though it will cost him his life. While this is happening, Peter is challenged by another servant girl to also give truthful testimony, tell the truth. He does not. in order to save his life. And this time we read, he denied Jesus with an oath, contrary to Jesus' instruction to not swear with an oath. This time Peter says, I do not know the man. A few chapters earlier, who do people say that I am? Peter, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Here, I don't even know the man. Jesus is a nameless, faceless person. Peter is saving his life, but he's losing his soul. Trial number 3, a crowd forms around Jesus and begins to beat and mock him. He does not recant the truth, though he spit on and he suffers. Similarly, a crowd forms around Peter and begins to challenge and mock him for his accent, we read. To avoid suffering, Peter calls down curses. Now you should note there's kind of an ambiguity here in the Greek text, because to call down curses is a verb in the Greek that always has an object to it. Kind of like what we might say in English, like forget him or forget her or forget that. There's always an object to the forget. But here there's a call down curses on, and the author leaves it blank. You're supposed to ask, who is Peter cursing? Well, what's the answer? Peter's not just cursing the air. He is cursing Jesus. Forget that man, he says, except you can insert a far more profane word. Let's summarize. Jesus maintains control. Peter falls apart. Jesus tells the truth. Peter lies. Jesus accepts suffering. Peter avoids it. I told you he's a lot like us. He is the everyman, and his cowardice here is complete. And by the way, to make it all worse, if all we had were the Gospel of Matthew, Peter would have remained like this, a coward, a failure. Why do I say that? Well, you may or may not have noted that Peter is not mentioned again after this in Matthew's Gospel. It's kind of remarkable because there's a whole lot of meat left on the whole Jesus story bone. Crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, all that. But none of it in Matthew's Gospel has to do with Peter. He's MIA, the rest of Matthew's Gospel. To requote the title of that 2007 Western film, this story is simply the assassination of Jesus Christ by the coward Simon Peter. And yet we know this wasn't the end of Peter. Even though Matthew does end Peter's story here, this isn't Peter's story's end. How do we know? Well, let me give you a surprising answer among many. Richard Bauckham is a Christian historian at Cambridge College in England. About 20 years ago, he wrote a really great book, you should read it, called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. And Bauckham went out to challenge the idea that the Gospels were like these made-up legends and documents that the early church created to give themselves power over people. And one of the things that he points out to contradict the Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code kind of crowd, is the seemingly unhelpful names, details, places that these Gospels in the Bible all have. There are many parts to the Gospels that do not help to advance the story or the plot. They seem extraneous to modern ears. I mean, sort of the modern day movie equivalent would be like, imagine you watch, Star Wars. Darth Vader comes on the screen, steps right in front of you, gets up close to the lens of the camera. He's like, hey y'all, first name Darth, last name Vader. I'm from Tatooine. Remember that place? Pretty hot with a black cloak on. Father, Luke and Leia. And then he goes back to force choking some hapless rebel soldiers. Why would you do that? It would only bog down the movie. So why do the gospel writers drop in names, places, details over and over? We hear about folk like Simon of Cyrene. He carries Jesus, and Simon of Cyrene's kids get named Rufus, Alexander. We heard about Simon a leper. Who's he? We heard about him last week. Why is he in there? Joanna, her husband worked for the wicked King Herod. That's an unhelpful detail. Why is that in there? This was the first century way of saying, go interview those people. Fact check me, bro. This isn't fake news. You want the source. Here he is, here she is, over and over. First century readers are given named sources to go interview about what had happened. And Bauckham, an expert in antiquities and ancient literature, says this is unique. So then, whose source are we talking to here about this trial? About this scene in the courtyard? There were no other disciples around to see it. They all fled, remember? Yes, I do. How do we know this whole scene with Peter even happened? Well, Matthew based his gospel, we know, in large part on Mark's gospel. And Mark's gospel has far more biographical information on Peter than any of the others. In other words, scholars have come to believe today that Mark's gospel really is Peter's gospel. Mark's account and story is really Peter's account and story. The point is, this moment in Matthew is only here because Peter was honest, truthful, vulnerable, and transparent enough to insist it be included in Mark's. Bauckham summarizes like this: no one in the early church, other than Peter himself, would have dared or wished to highlight the weakness and failure of the leader of the entire Christian movement with the candor Mark's narrative does. Therefore, the only possible source for the account of Peter's denial would be Peter himself. Isn't that amazing? I think it is. I mean, this account, it profits Peter nothing. It helps the Christian movement zero to name this, to point out, hey, y'all, the leader of our whole deal, total coward. Like blew it, cursed he even knew Jesus. This helps the Christian movement nothing. I mean, today, we think we like to tell it like it is, right? I mean, we like to go on social media and we're keeping it real. Let me tell you something. Peter's been keeping it real since the mid-first century. I mean, he's way more real than most of us. Let me ask you, can you be as honest, truthful, vulnerable, transparent about your journey with Jesus as Peter is here? Could we put it out there for all the world to see, our biggest failure and flaw, and still insist Jesus can meet us and use us in spite of it? Can we be that honest? Can you be that honest? Writing for a generation yet unknown, that's what he did. How can we be as honest as Peter? I think it's not by looking at his false courage or his cowardice even, but number 3, by really looking at, exploring Peter's cure. What do I mean? I mean, the next time around, when the opportunity came around, Peter didn't mess around. When the Neronian persecution, mid-60s AD, swept through Jerusalem, Peter was caught, refused to recant, and himself was crucified. This time, he died saying, I, in fact, do know the man. I know him. He died confessing Jesus Christ as Lord. And we know this because just a few years later, we have this recorded in church history for all time. Clement of Alexandria, writing in 85 AD, said, let us remember the noble examples of our own generation. Through jealousy and hatred, the greatest and most just pillars of our church were persecuted and even put to death. Here it is. Even Peter, at last, having delivered his testimony, departed to the place of glory prepared for him. On trial in the courtyard of Caiaphas, Peter withheld his testimony. This time, his last time, he delivered his true testimony. What made the difference? What set him on the course to being cured? I think we see it in the last words of the passage where it says, he tells us, and he went outside and he wept bitterly. He wept bitterly. In other words, our bitter tears can begin our cure. Our bitter tears can begin our cure. Weeping, hear me, weeping even bitterly can open a door, can become a pathway to healing, to emotional healing, relational healing, to redemption. Weeping bitterly can begin to cure even the most broken and lost heart, no matter what's going on the inside. Now let's ask, why did Peter weep like this? Well, on one hand, I do think he remembered the words of Jesus where Jesus predicted his failure. He realized Jesus, had been right, and he, Peter, had been wrong. But I don't think Peter was weeping only over Jesus' prediction of his failure. I think Peter was also weeping over Jesus' prediction of Peter's success. You'll recall when they met years earlier in their relationship, Jesus had what? Renamed Peter. He said, your name is Simon. It means like a river reed. It bends in the wind. It's wishy-washy, but I don't see you like that, son. I'm going to rename you Peter, rock. You're not Simon. You're Peter. I mean, you're like a immovable force, son. You're something against which the gate of hell can't even overcome. That's who you are. That's what Jesus said about Peter. But now Peter didn't even overcome, the gates to Disneyland. let alone the gates of hell. Instead, he's overcome by one little servant girl. So yeah, I do think Peter wept over confirmation, evidence of his failure, but maybe even more so over the prediction of his success. Why? Because it's like when people who you love tell you they love you. Maybe your mom or your dad, they tell you they love you. Your children, friends tell you they love you, they're for you, and then you go and you do something that betrays their trust. You lie to them. You do something that you shouldn't, and when they find out, you see the disillusionment, you see the shame in their eyes, you let them down. Or it's kind of like the athletic prospect who gets the big potential tag. Athletes hate that label because it can be hard living up to the big potential label. And if and when that athlete fails, if they don't make it, they don't live up to what others saw in them, they struggle. They wonder, what's wrong with me? Why did it go this way? Were my parents wrong? Were the talent scouts wrong? Was I wrong? They struggle with the gap between what people saw in them and how they really are, apparently. But let me tell you, unlike a talent scout or a child or a parent, Jesus is never wrong about you. He is always right. And what Peter's failure shows us is this, that Jesus always sees more in us than we see in ourselves. He sees more in you than you can even see in yourself. That's some good news we're getting up and coming to church for today on Palm Sunday. I mean, he saw what Peter could become before Peter ever became that. He related to Peter as who Peter would be, not just who Peter was. And listen, he does doing the same thing with you right now. And I want to tell you, Jesus sees who you're becoming even more than who you are in the moment. He loves you where you are. But he calls you to become more. He calls you courageous if you feel like a coward. He's saying to some of you today, you are a success, my child, even though you might feel like a failure. And if you see that and you can feel that, and when the tears maybe even begin to roll over the gap between where Jesus sees you and where you really might be today, I want to tell you, that's where healing and your cure can begin. My senior year in high school, 18-year-old Morgan was a mess on the inside. Grew up in church, but ended up denying my faith in front of my friends. The evening of one Christmas, my senior year, I'm gonna never forget it. Christmas night, gifts have been opened, people gone to bed, super dark in the house. I get up, feeling something drawn, I guess you could say. And I remember opening up the Christmas story, Luke 2. I read it out of this children's illustrated book, black and white, and the beauty of it, the simplicity of it just struck my heart. And I just began to weep on that sofa over who I'd become, the choices I had made, the lies I had told. And while I didn't really give my life to Christ fully until maybe about a year later, those bitter tears that night set me on a course, on a process of healing that ultimately Jesus used to rescue me. And I want to tell you, I think the same thing could be true of you. It certainly was of Peter. Because just days after this, after his traumatic failure, guess who shows up in his life again? Jesus on a beach, having a meal, cooking some fish, saying, come on back. Do you love me, son? Go feed my sheep. Do you love me, Peter? Take care of my lambs. And Peter did it because he saw he had a Savior who died for him and therefore gave him a true and better source of courage that kept him all the way to the end. Maybe you've sung this hymn before, just as I am, without one plea, but that your blood was shed for me. I kind of like those words. I think it's true of us today as well. In just a moment, Pastor Barnabas is going to come and transition us. Our band's going to come back out. And created some time here to be able to sing and worship and receive many of you at the front. If you'd like prayer today for something in your life, maybe something you're weeping over or crying over, would invite you to come and allow God to touch your life. Pastor Barnabas, would you come?